We all know Russia as the world's richest country in terms of natural resources. Russia holds the world's largest natural gas reserves and the 8th largest crude oil reserve. For decades, the country was successfully pumping oil and gas, discovering new sources, and trading with the world. Russian politicians for years have been calling Russia's reserves inexhaustible and infinite. But the world's richest country might just not be as rich as it says it is. You will be shocked to find out the scale of Russian deception and the real size of Russia's crude oil and gas reserves. First, it's important to point out that there is no official information from the Russian government. Official information about reserves of Russian hydrocarbon raw materials are classified as secret information. According to Article 5, Item 2 of Russian Federation law, dated 21st of July 1993, all information about reserves, extraction, production, and consumption of strategic raw materials in the Russian Federation, including balanced oil reserves, is classified as a state secret. That's why, in the analysis of so-called official numbers, we will use the words of ministers and publicly available data from Russia's largest companies. Currently, there are 4 largest oil and gas development companies in Russia: Gazprom, Rosneft, Lukoil, and Surgutneftgaz. So the largest one, Gazprom, in 2010 published an annual report which stated the total oil resources available as 4.9 billion tons, or approximately 37 billion barrels. Around that time, Rosneft, the second largest company, in 2009 annual report claimed that resources available to them were around 2.5 billion tons, or 18 billion barrels. In total, these two companies make the largest share of oil development. So if we add these numbers and a bit of other companies, the total reserves in 2010 were around 60 to 65 billion barrels. Later, in 2015, Rosneft reported about 11.5 billion tons of oil available, or around 80 billion barrels. In 2020, Gazprom has reported about 178 billion barrels of oil available. If we add up all the numbers, then in total Russia now must have around 300 billion barrels of oil, which is the size of Venezuela's reserves. These numbers really don't add up that well. Ministers are also saying very contradictory information. In 2021, National Resources Minister Alexander Kozlov said Russia has equivalent of 59 years of oil deposits and 103 years of gas reserves. In 2022, Yevgeny Petrov, the head of the Rosneft state agency, estimated that proven recoverable oil reserves would last the country for 33 years. He said Russia has enough natural gas that it's technically feasible to extract to last us for 62 years. If we take into account that each day Russia pumps up to 11 billion barrels a day, 3.86 billion barrels per year, based solely on the words of government officials, we can estimate that Russia has up to 250 billion barrels of oil left. The math, again, doesn't add up. Why would Russia lie about its resources? Personally, I see a few reasons for that. First, the Soviet past. In the Soviet Union, everything revolves around one idea: the USSR is the greatest country in the world, number one in every area, and no defeats are accepted. The majority of Russia's government authorities lived most of their lives in that environment of the decide for the sake of making the leader happy. By the sheer inertia, they are continuing to lie to make the leader happy. These lies also help to solidify the idea of Russia's supremacy, at least in the field they have no influence on, because the country can't brag on its tech advancements or other areas that depend on people. So bragging and lying about natural resources is the only way to be first, at least somewhere. Like all restoration regimes, is preoccupied almost exclusively with the here and now rather than a long-term strategy. The political implications of diminished oil and gas revenue may seem distant and avoidable. Indeed, Russia's macroeconomic position today is quite solid. The country's budget is balanced. Hard currency reserves are second only to China's. Inflation, while rising, is still among the lowest level in the country's post-Soviet history, and the public debt is only 18.2% of the GDP. But the second reason is far bigger: the possible influence. Energy is one of the most important factors for the survival of humanity. It provides heat, light, and mobility, the fuel of the economy. This is why the possession of energy is the dominant issue in politics of every country. Russia is the biggest exporter of oil and oil products to the European Union, supplying 2.2 million barrels per day of oil and 1.2 million BPD of oil products. By being the biggest exporter of oil and claiming almost infinite supply, Russia for years was able to find its way in politics. As Jason Furman, President Obama's former advisor, said, that Russia is incredibly unimportant in the global economy, except for oil and gas. While countries are hooked on oil and gas, Russia is treated with respect and can push other countries to play by its rules. For example, Russia is now actively forcing the European Union to pay for gas in rubles, which only strengthens the currency. So yeah, the main point of lying about the available resources is the sheer power the numbers give. And when resources are depleted, the Kremlin can always say something like, "We were just playing politics and selling to the best bidder." But how big is the deception? What do independent sources say? It turns out many companies have closely monitored Russia's oil and gas reserves. In 2010, British Petroleum published a report where it estimated that Russia had 74.2 billion barrels of oil, which would have been enough for 20.3 years. Gas reserves were said to total 44.38 trillion cubic meters, enough to last 84.1 years. Later, in 2012, BP found the growth of oil resources from 74.2 billion barrels to 87.2. At the rate of production at that time, it would have been enough for 23.4 years. Gas reserves, on the other hand, have decreased dramatically to 32.9 trillion cubic meters and would have lasted 55.6 years. The 2017 report from British Petroleum has demonstrated the growth in oil reserves up to 109.5 billion barrels, which would have been enough for 26.6 years. Gas reserves, on the other hand, have stayed relatively the same. The latest report of 2021 shows that oil reserves totaled at 107.8 billion barrels, or 27.6 years. And if we believe the data from the US Energy Information Administration, Russia's oil reserves should be equal to 80 billion barrels. Just by looking at the independent data, we can see that Russia is reporting at least twice as much resources as they really have. The sheer size of lies is mind-blowing. Of course, Russia's companies have gradually started to implement new technologies of oil extraction. For example, horizontal boreholes and computerized systems of reservoirs management. Thus, the evaluations of extractable oil reserves keep changing. Because of new technologies that allow oil to be extracted even from depleted oil fields, Russian oil companies managed to increase oil extraction by 50%. But still, that doesn't mean that the real size of Russia's oil resources changed or increased by much. These technologies might have added a few more years to the countdown clock, but it still keeps ticking. What future awaits Russia with these lies? How long will they keep lying? Unfortunately, no one knows that for sure. We can only make assumptions. If we take the word of British Petroleum that Russia has enough oil to last 27.6 years, if the production rate will keep rising due to new ties with China and India, we can estimate that the lies can go on for another 20 years. With the development in technology, the Russian reserves should be able not only to satisfy the current needs, but also the demand of fast-growing Asian markets in future decades. In order to achieve its goals, the government of Russia needs to focus effort on the modernization of the sector and its innovative development. Russia must also overcome structural disproportions, improve its legislative base, and strengthen overall control. These goals are ambitious, but achievable. Will the Russian government do that? Or it will keep selling what it has and choose the options with the least resistance? The time will tell. What we can say for sure, the resources will run dry eventually, and no lies would cover that. Russia relies heavily on revenues from oil and natural gas, which in 2021 made up to 57% of Russia's GDP. So if this income source runs dry, the country will face the biggest depression it has ever seen. What do you think? Is Russia really lying, or other countries trying to undermine Russia's power? Write your answers in the comments down below. Share this video with friends, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel to always be posted on the world's economy. Thank you for watching and see you soon.